Good morning. Welcome to B Cube Sunday Brunch. It's usually B Cube Sunday mornings, but we, uh, on the days when we have Karen and Phil and Brenda, who's not with us today, I understand that she is down rocking the world at LostCon. Well, on the bright side, we are very lucky to have with us. I will let Karen introduce our guest in just a moment. The two of our editors from the book that started out being called Retribution and Revenge, but morphed into Alternative Liberties. And how interesting that we have a cover expert with us today. Sorry for the leak of key data. The next thing we're doing on that book is figuring out what my next brilliant cover is going to be. Now, this book is Retribution and Revenge is how we started it. That is because 8 years ago, Phil and I had a conversation, and she blessed me with her skill set on doing a book called Alternative Truths. Because when our dear leader was anointed into office back then, the crowd sizes weren't up to his expectations, and so they expanded on them and said, "Oh no, there were really this many people." And when asked about it, Kellyanne, bless her heart, and may she always be perpetually blonde, the said, "Well, no, we just used alternative facts to arrive at those numbers." And so Phil and I sat around for a couple of days back and forth before we figured out that Alternative Truths was a good, and hence came the Alternative series. And now we have Phil and Lou J. Berger, and Cliff Winnig, and Irene Radford, as we see here, in her lovely Christmas sweater.
Yes, with my reindeer.
Oh, you got your reindeer, and I've got my "With God as my witness, I thought turkeys could fly" T-shirt.
Wild turkeys can, if they have.
Yes. Well, so that tells us that the station manager was actually a rural person who had grown up killing birds. But anyway, we have got a wonderful show here for you today, and enough discussion of. You should have really gone for the ugly Christmas sweater, though, because that is just charming.
I've got several ugly Christmas sweaters.
Okay, well, that's a good thing. Now, Karen.
Yes.
Oh, she doth speak. Karen is also one of the editors, and so Karen, you have booked us a wonderful guest today, and I'm going to say goodbye and allow you the opportunity to introduce her and make the show great.
I will do that, Bob. Don't go too far away because we need you if we need any work putting covers up on the screen. So keep an eye on us, okay?
I'm always here watching.
Thank you. I'm delighted to welcome to the B Cube Sunday Brunch Francesca Myman, who I first met at a convention. And that's because one of her many duties with Locus Magazine is covering major conventions. Francesca is a senior editor at Locus. If you don't know about Locus, it is the publisher's weekly of speculative fiction, covering everything from what comes out every month to major stories on leaders in the field and award winners. Francesca grew up in Point Reyes Station in California in a domed house adjacent to what was once Philip K. Dick's writing studio. She's a graduate of one of the universities back east and has 2 graduate degrees in English and creative writing with interdisciplinary classes in art, design, film, and criticism. And at this point, you've done over 100 Locus covers, haven't you?
Oh, I think 120 7 or something like that at this point. So
And
quite a few.
these things are just mind-boggling, and beautiful, and look great on the coffee table because I'm a subscriber to Locus. I invited Francesca on, well, because Bob and I fight over cover design all the time, and not just covers of magazines, but covers of books. And so, what I'm hoping we'll talk about today, oh, there he is. And what I'm hoping we'll talk about today is the impact that the past 20 years in publishing have had on cover design, because I was astonished to learn from Bob that you do a slightly different cover for Kindle, and you do a different cover for print. That covers now, people are making decisions not based on a cover in front of them at a bookstore, but often on a little tiny thumbnail that they see up on a screen, on top of which you now have a bunch of absolute amateurs flailing around designing covers, who put the title down at the bottom where nobody can see it, et cetera, et cetera. And I wanted to get Francesca to talk to me a little bit about the trends that she has seen, good and bad, in cover art and cover design, and also the difference between cover art and cover design, because I keep having to explain that to people. So
sure. And you heard me in here with the promises of discussing AI as well, I must say.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I mean, so I guess my question is, do you want to talk about what good design is? Is that the idea, or
jump in any way you want, and maybe even talk about what good design looked like before AI in indie publishing?
Oh, goodness. I mean, the history of design going back way back.
I'm talking for speculative fiction.
For speculative fiction.
You know, where it used to be some guy with a gun and some woman with a tiny bikini and a giant dinosaur.
And I have to say I love the pulp covers. I do. And the origins of what we think makes science fiction and fantasy art really go way back. I mean, it certainly the influence of especially in fantasy covers, the influence of even the Pre-Raphaelites or the Victorian fantasy illustration is still quite prevalent. Like you go there and you look at somebody like Charles Vess now, who's very influenced by Rackham and the early design, early 19th century designers and artists. So in some ways, you might say that science fiction and fantasy art has been quite traditionalist. It's been realistic and representational. And, I both my parents were artists. I grew up in, this household just full of art. My mother was a collage artist. My father did big abstract paintings. And so my ideas of what art are quite, I like breaking out of the boundaries and playing with things. Artists like Bill Sienkiewicz, for example, like comics has had a very energizing impact on cover design and our ideas about, you'll see the angles that people use, and they're thinking about movement and motion and bringing the eye in instead of these very static covers like Frank R. Paul, the very early pulp covers. But there's still a real charm in those older covers. And although sometimes they're racist or sexist or otherwise awful, there are some back there that are quite beautiful to look at and fun to look at. But I would say that the speed of production is a huge limiting factor these days on artists and on what we can do with a cover, and also on what mediums we're expected to use. I think in the earlier days of cover design, when they started using artists, when it wasn't just like a yellow book cover or whatever, you would have painters who would go in and they might take a relatively long time. I mean, they could churn it out, the really great ones, but I won't name names or anything, but I've heard stories about, when you summon a painter to your book, it can take a really long time, and that's not tolerated anymore. And I think that's to the detriment of the field's art in many ways. On the other hand, the stuff we can do with digital media is insanely wonderful. Unfortunately, we are now facing, as artists, and I've been at Locus, I think 18 years, and I've been working as the cover designer and artist for them for a long time. Out of that, I don't know, 10 years, 11 years, I don't know exactly how long. But like I said, 127 covers. And that's like each month. So that's a churn. I did eventually get someone else to help me do some of the covers as well, Steven Siegel. But I do a lot of them, and you have to do it fast. And so I love experimenting with different media. Like I when I have the chance, I will play with pencils or with paints. But for the most part, I am stuck with doing like I got to do like whatever I can do fast, and that is often digital art, and it's still not very fast because I'm very intricate, and I do get pulled into the art, but it's faster.
I want to ask you a question, which I have not noticed this. Obviously, the name Locus on the magazine is in a particular typeface.
Yes.
Do, I assume that Locus has a style guide and that only specific fonts and typefaces can be used on your covers. Is that correct?
Not in the least. I am the style guide. Liza's the style guide. Between the two of us, we make up whatever we want to do. So I just have a list of fonts that I like, and it's literally like I have category. I've been gathering fonts. They're so precious and wonderful. Thank you, font designers. And I just have them organized by category, and I literally just have a text edit file where I go in and I'm like, the science fiction fonts that are strong. And
could you name a couple of the fonts that you really like?
Oh, well, you know what? I have to give a shout out to Steven Siegel, who is the other cover designer that we took on, and he's done maybe 30 covers for Locust for us. And he brought my favorite font in the world to us. It's called Transat, and it's just a beautiful, clean, elegant, modern font that instantly elevates anything you put it on, and it's become my go-to font. Before that time, I would go with like some old school stuff like Franchise or like blocky science fictional stuff. You're often wanting a sans if you are going into science fiction. You want something clean. And legibility is so important, especially like you mentioned, you need stuff to be in thumbnail these days. And I occasionally want to pull in a fancy ass font, and Liza's like, I can't read that. Fair.
Phil, did you want to say something?
Oh, I just that there was a period of time when my New York publisher, who I'm no longer really working with, insisted on these very curvy, elaborate fonts, and that the letters blend into each other. You can't tell if it's an E or an A, where the L ends and the A begins,
Right.
And I'm so glad that you have moved away from that.
Yes. I mean, the interesting thing is, and I keep telling people this when they're like, I'm not sure people will be able to read it. You see those memes go around the internet where there's missing letters and things, and you could still, and like weird characters inserted, and our brains are designed to create legibility out of chaos. And so sometimes to our detriment, we make stuff up that's not there, speaking of fake news, but our eyes are a little tricksy sometimes, but so we can see that, but it's better to not make people struggle.
I was offered an artist for a new series, and I refused her because there was so many curly cues in the art that you couldn't see the picture.
Right.
Right. And another argument I have had with that particular publisher was that for a long time, they insisted on the main character being depicted on the cover, doing something.
Right.
But it had to have a human interaction. But I wanted vague and symbolic. But then all of a sudden, with my last two books with that particular publisher, I had envisioned some of those pictures you used to get in highlighter magazine, where it's a line drawing and you're supposed to find 5 wolves in the background, kind of a thing. And that was kind of what I wanted, because the book is about hidden creatures in the wildwood. And they gave it to me. It's and there are dwarves and elves and gnomes, kind of hidden in amongst this Celtic-ish line drawing. And I was just wondering about the attitude transfer from interacting with a human being to this more abstract kind of cover.
That is a very perspicacious comment on transitions that have occurred. I do think that we are trying to compete with literary markets more than we were in the past is one of the things that's happening, and literary markets really hate representational face stuff, and in fact it's become a method of codifying genre of ghettoizing specifically science fiction and fantasy art, and it's like you're the ones that have the people with the swords and the, I love a representational cover. I as an artist, I'm a portraitist first and foremost. I love drawing and the human figure and so on, but I don't often do that because really modern covers are much more about boom and impact. Some of them are, even more in YA. You will still see a lot of portraits, a lot of characters, and I love both, honestly. But I can understand the desire to push out of that, and it actually can broaden. It's marketing as well. It can broaden the group of people that are willing to pick up your book.
Francesca, I have a question for you. I've worked as a publications manager, editor. And in that, I worked a lot with artists who were doing covers of brochures, books, and magazines. And one of the challenges that we've always discovered is you'll find art that you just love, a photo or a drawing, but it is art that you cannot put text over. There's no place to put the title. I mean, when you were doing a cover for Locus, and Francesca's going to show us some of her covers in a little bit, she's got a ton of text she has to put on, and yet the picture also has to communicate. How do you work with artists to let them know that there needs to be space for the words?
It's interesting to me how often people don't consider that. And that is and you're talking about the differences between art and design, and the designer, usually I'm both, but the designer is usually a separate person in the book cover industry, and they are given whatever they're given from the artist, and then they have to struggle to fit in the words. And it was really nice if literally just tell the artist.
And you just love the part where part of the art is going to be light and part of it is going to be dark. But your type, your headline, your names are either going to be very light or very dark. So in part of the design, they disappear. You can tell. I've done a lot of cover design, and I'm unable to do any art because I'm not an artist. And I get this art, and everyone says, it's so beautiful. And I'm like, I'm going to shoot this person.
Right. I completely understand. It's a huge struggle. I have learned to design for tons of text, and it's kind of funny for me because it affects the kind of art that I produce. And when I take all that text off, it looks like I'm this incredibly stark, central small things, big spaces around it. It looks like I'm doing that intentionally as an artist. But what you don't realize is that I'm just cramming, so much text into it that there needs to be light and air around it, and there needs to be a thought about the overall tone of the image.
So what you're saying is there is an actual art to doing art for covers.
Yes, there is. And it's different from doing art just for art's sake or for art by itself, for sure. 100%.
Yeah. I was just saying, in working with the Bookview Cafe, which is a co-op of authors, and each author is responsible for getting their covers done as well as typing their manuscripts. And we have, I want to do your cover. And it, just send me an image. And it comes back where all the central image, and there's just this little teeny tiny border around it for any type. And so it's been an education in teaching the artists, you have to condense the image and do a fade out kind of a thing. And that's been, I couldn't do it myself. I don't have the artistic eye to put it all together, but once I see it, I know if it's right or not.
You know if it's right or not. Yes.
Francesca, I've seen some in books. And of course, Locust gets every book on the planet. People mail a copy to Locust.
You know, I
They have
see.
to have a physical copy in order to
Yes.
to put it in their lists. And people like Jasper Ford, I mean, people do these elaborate covers where the art wraps around to the back.
I love that.
And that is Francesca, are there any books in particular that have very clever cover design that you would urge us to look at?
Oh, yes, and I can share my screen a little bit, and we can look at a few. Let me see. I'll, just some examples of over the past decade of covers that I think are particularly strong. Let me see if we can just share my screen. I'm going to generously share my entire screen. I did clean up a little, but ignore any mess that you may see. And I think Bob is going to have to let my screen share happen. So we'll.
Bob, are you there? Hello, hello. Let me find him.
Let's see.
He often multitasks and tends to the dogs.
Yeah, there we go. We're now.
Are we live? Okay, great. And we're going to have a little bit of visual chaos here, but bear with me on that. I am going to pull these up and we're going to look at a couple things. So this is the example. Can you see the lagoon cover there?
Absolutely, yes.
Sorry about the, I think we've got a lovely infinite circle going here because I have to share my screen this way. I'll figure out a better way next time. But this is such a strong, beautiful cover. And it's one that you can't have without the lettering. This artist is not going to walk away with a print they can sell. But wow, over the years, I have just been like, this is Joey Hi-Fi, Simon & Schuster 2014. And it still sticks with me as a cover that is just a strikingly strong example. I'm envious of how few words this artist needs to work with, but they have done a fantastic job of doing it. This is a very common method of handling. Of handling text these days, which is very giant, several rows of lettering, and then things wound in and around it. And
so,
it's
Francesca, now that means that the designer can't just take a piece of art and plop
100% right. This is not plug and play. Yeah.
This is really, I'm actually working in a situation with a cover similar to this where you want to drop it, and it looks really brutal to do this. How does one do that?
Oh, a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of thought about how things are going to be. And this is where digital workflows come in handy, because if you're working on many different layers, then you have a lot more ability to move things around. Now, even when I paint, I work in layers because I just need that flexibility to move stuff around. This is Michaela Alcano. That was Harper Voyager 2024. Here's an example of a designer who has done something really wonderful with a non-standard piece of art. And the art is by Serena Malian, and the designer, hang on, let me close it out because it's all in the file now. Designer is Owen Corrigan, Harper Voyager 2023. And I love this cover. I think that it accomplishes some of the things that we were talking about earlier with Phil about how you can have a figure, but it can also have an abstract presence and have this is almost abstract, and is a very strong piece.
I want to call out to Bob, who I'm sure is listening, the way that some of the words, including lost in there, were infiltrated by the design. Because
it's true.
He and I just did something similar on the truths in Southern Truth to show that the truth was disintegrating. And
yes.
You're getting a message out of your type.
Yes. And they've had to make a decision to make that font really large to offset the fact that there's a lot of gradation and tone behind the font. And they've done a great job of that.
What I found fascinating there was I tend to, when I do design, really warn clients against having a title broken up by different styles. But if you looked at the author's name, that had Valerie in a different weight.
Yes.
With Valdez, and yet it worked.
It works. And you can break every rule. This one is just, there's another thing that's happening. You see that is just incredibly complicated and beautiful, and yet also simple. Like, this is Michaela Alcano, who I respect very much as a designer. You're not going to, this is another not plug and play scenario. Like, you're not getting a piece of art and putting it over. You're passing it to an artist who is also a designer, and you don't always get a person who can do both. But
look at the way the N is woven, which gives it a 3-dimensional effect.
Stunning. I just love this.
Everyone who does their own covers, I want you to look. This is why you hire a cover artist.
Hire a darn designer. First of all, we gotta eat, and AI is coming for our jobs. Second of all, we could do stuff like this, But then if you have like your more standard covers, this is art by Victor Mascara. This is Tor 2020. I just love a standard science fictional cover, but what you'll see the artist has done here is they have introduced a sense of motion, of movement, with that lower area here that you'll see. And so it's traditional, wow, but beautifully, beautifully done. And you'll notice that the designer has brought in texture into the into this title. And I think it's beautiful. And they've played with, your kerning, and they've spaced it out in a way that's very modern. If you want your work to look modern and contemporary, often that's a matter of light and air space around your font. You don't want things to be too crammed in, which, sucks for me as a magazine cover designer, because I have a ton of words to put in. So I'm trying to get light and air with a ton of words, but they're lucky they've got a very short thing here. So
okay. At what point does the author's name become bigger than the title?
I want to say that it happens a lot. And it can, let me see if I've got an example of that, because I was looking for, let's see if I've got one. Here's one, but it's actually part of the title. But I want to just point out really quickly, there's often some gender bias in that men's covers are more likely to have large font, bylines, and it's just a problem throughout the industry. That the female, it's just a thing that it's a fact. So something to fight against, perhaps. But it isn't that, it's not, unless you're Stephen King these days, it's not really that common to have a gigantic name. I love this cover. I think it's so sweet.
Well, let's face Stephen King books will sell because of his name.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's really so obviously his name is bigger than the title. Yeah. Or at least it's always on the top where people look first.
Now, this is really different.
Yeah.
This is stunning. I'm going to tell you. So this art by Vault 49. So it's this is like a design house. The designer is Lizzie Bromley from Saga 2017. This is one of my favorite covers of all time. It's stuck out in my memory. And it's subtle, and it breaks some rules in that as a thumbnail, like, look at that down here, small. You can't tell what's going on, but it's so beautiful that you can break a few rules for this.
Francesca, does that cover, that image is coming in, does it wrap?
I believe it did. Yes. I believe it wrapped all the way around the back. And because you're talking about tone, Karen, and tonality is actually quite uniform throughout, but they've still managed to pop the text forward with a certain type of simplicity. You'll notice there's a lot of negative space around this incredibly complex image that allows it to not be busy. So you can have
it's also three-dimensional because that twig is coming through the O in Howard.
Right? I love it. It's genius design. It's not just art, it's design. So
and there's so often those blank spots are filled with reviews or taglines. But this one intrigues me just because there isn't.
I know. And it may be like, I don't know if this is maybe there was a small tagline on the final cover or something. Sometimes I'll get a hold of stuff before but I think that this was clear and clean without that, and they put it all in the back. This is designed by Ingrid Paulson, Coach House Books, and I was actually unable to find the artist, which brings me to a point that I want to make for publishers everywhere. Please make it easy to find your cover artist. Please credit your cover artist and your cover designer. It's very easy to do. and it helps their career, and it helps people who are like all the bibliographers and librarians out there are going to not have to tear
Oh,
as much
this
hair.
is
Yeah, that
beautiful.
Isn't it
that
gorgeous?
is stunning.
The
Yes.
color. I am a color junkie. I love it.
Yeah. For the the people in our audience who are having to put covers together, what I use Dreamtime a lot for my base image. And then Maya Catherine Bonhoff manipulates it with, additional stuff. But they have a deal. If you put the author's name, and they give you a link to put for the author's name, you put that on your copyright page, and they'll give you your next image for free.
Nice. That's interesting. I didn't know that. And it shows how hard it is to get people to do that.
Yeah. So I'm making a point as I write new stuff to put my cover artists
Thank you. Thank
that
you so much.
putting that code on the copyright page.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
We have an interesting question coming in from Ramona Ridgewell. And the question is, with the unkindness of magicians, how well does that cover pass ADA compliance?
That's a really interesting question, and I cannot answer it. I do not know.
Could you talk to us a little bit about where ADA compliance sort of comes in the art world?
That's just the ability to scan it comes in a lot of ways. So many, or it ought to come in more than it does. I think there are people who are not necessarily always thinking about that, but this is one of the reasons why we talk about legibility. It's also scannability sometimes. Like if you're looking at a really fancy, let me see if I've got one of those here, like a really fancy font may not scan quite as easily, but yeah, that's a really interesting question, and it's one that I will think about some more. I need to put some thought into that. That's a good point.
I wanted to move us in back to what Phil was talking about. She's buying images from Dreamtime. A lot of us buy our images from iStock and places like that. And someone will say to me, well, you're buying that image and it's designed, there's an artist's name on it. But I can't guarantee that isn't AI. Where does one go if you want stock images that aren't AI?
I've got to say, so I hit a point of overwhelm with doing locust covers, time after time after time every month. And I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do one or two of them, 3 or 4 of them even as Adobe stock. And for a while there, I did that. I saved my sanity by turning to Adobe stock. And in the last year, it has become untenable in many ways to do that because it is absolutely swamped with the art, what I call the art of overwhelm, which is AI. And it is, I have an art history background. I have devoted considerable time to being able to detect AI, and I can detect, I believe, 90% of it still. That's going to change. I've written an article up on Medium about how to look at it because I think it's so important to be able to detect it. Things that people can look for, ways that we can educate our eyes so we're not just like a deer in the headlights of this new technology, which is completely unprepared. But it's tough, and you're going to need to ask people. You need to ask around. You select the thing that you like. Maybe go read my article on how to detect AI or other articles on how to detect AI. And then ask some friends, ask some experts, do you think this could be AI? Because there's a lot of deceptively labeled stuff, even in Adobe stock. I do recommend Adobe stock because you can filter out AI generated images, but I continually find mislabeled.
Yeah. I have found that if you look at the code they'll give you to put on your copyright page, if it's got a name somewhere in that lengthy URL, basically is what it is, it's generally okay. If it's got a studio design name, then there's a good chance that at least some of it is AI.
It's true. Although I will say there are a number of trends that I'm following with AI and lying about AI that people are doing. And a name is not a guarantee. There's
No, a
unfortunately.
lot of people just all their work is AI, so their name is on it, but it's AI.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Or they'll invent an artist from the 19th century and I'll be like,
Yeah. I mean, that's just one of the guidelines I use. You're never going to be 100%, but
So it's really interesting. In order to commission an artist, I mean, I see these artists like Mark Ferrari and Jeff Sturgeon, and when they do work, this is a work of weeks and weeks and weeks on what they're producing. Is it ever possible to go to artists like that and say, what do you have in your backstock?
Yes.
That I could use as a cover? And then you're getting this amazing quality. I mean, it may not be topically, but if you're just looking for a feeling, we want fairies, we want to be in outer space, I want to be on a planet. I'm wondering if backstock from people like that, if they would license it for you.
Sometimes so. And I do think artists need to be better about God, my website is terrible, and I want to be better. I do. What I would like to do, and I think everyone should try to do, is have very clearly stated licensing. Like you have your gallery, and then underneath it you say this is available for licensing. This is not available for licensing, because it is tough for people. I know there are people out there who both have money and they want to work with artists, and it can actually be a little tough. I get that.
Susan Omberg Caro has just replied on the ADA issue that her iPhone recognizes the image. And I don't know if she means that it will have a subtitle and tell you that it is branches with foliage.
Yes.
Or if you're using the audio capability of the phone and it tells you what it is.
And it can also read the text as well.
That's amazing that it can read the text. I wasn't sure if the lack of contrast would be an issue, but I guess maybe the really big letters are help with that. I don't know. Like
Jeff Sturgeon has just made the comment that he has a back catalog and that he has contributed to a number of covers that way. So yes, that is a way to go.
There you are.
Yeah, I am currently working on a nonfiction book, and working with I'm privileged to work with a cover artist that I know pretty well, and he's a cartoonist, and I'm actually finding that cartoon art manifests very quickly.
Mm. Yeah,
because it's a flat thing, and that is actually, I had noticed that a couple of my publishers had used cartoon art that they commissioned. And I thought that's a way to get something totally custom that will not get overly involved.
Yeah, and cartoon artists they're designed for they know how to work with the turn. They know how to make things happen quickly. So that is definitely
so. Francesca, talk to me a little bit about when you see a batch this month's books coming in and stuff like that. What trends are you seeing in covers, both at the corporate, the Tor level? And at the the indie level? And I have to say that sometimes I feel as though Tor's books, the fantasy ones, all look alike. Like it's gone through the Tor art machine. Am I crazy, or is there a style right now?
There are a number of different styles going on, and you've seen that in some of the ones that I shared. You'll have these sort of bold, bright colors that are flat backgrounds, and then maybe some intricate work with the design heavy stuff, intricate work with the actual text of the title. That is definitely a trend that has been going on for a couple of years now. But is there, a recognizable house style? I think Tor has been a really powerful force for artists many years. I wish Irene Gallo was still there, because she was more than just a design, more than just an art director. She was a custodian of young artists and a person who brought people up, and I do miss her voice in that. But and you know, Tor has done it great. They do a great job, for example, of still Tor.com, of like crediting younger artists, crediting all the artists that they get a hold of, and like newer artists, I should say, and like showcasing their work. But is there like a design trend? I mean, there's so many of them that it's really hard to like
One
nail
of
down
the
a few.
trends that I'm seeing, which is really nice,
Yeah.
and actually it turns up in some of your locust covers,
Mhm.
is that the image and the background are in the same color family.
Ah,
All these shades of turquoise, all these shades of red with maybe
Yeah.
black type over it. But I'm seeing what I call the monotonal. I don't know the
oh,
technical
that's
word.
interesting.
But I'm
Yeah.
seeing a lot of it. Patrick Swenson at Fairwood
I love his
has
covers.
extraordinary covers.
Yeah.
The new one he just did for the 2-hour transport and anthology is really exquisite. But
Yes.
again, you've got a very powerful dark teal background, and then all this artwork happening in shades of teal, maybe a little bit of yellow, of a big science fictional abstraction.
Yes. Is that one of the Artemis covers? I really love.
I
I
think
love
it is.
the Artemis covers.
A cover I wanted to mention is John Wiswell's first novel, Someone You Can Build a Nest In. Came out both in England and the US simultaneously. The covers are so different. In
Yes.
the US, big, red, angry looking cover with a black figure in the middle, very ominous. And in Europe, they went with an icy teal and white, such a different feeling.
There are often, you know, such a disparate, and this comes down to marketing and what people, and also like just people, what people are expecting, what the people like. But yeah, there's often a stark difference between UK and US editions, and sometimes you can't even pinpoint why, but you know when you look at it, that's probably the UK edition. You know, there's certain trends with fonts that they use and that sort of thing.
There's
Go ahead, Karen.
There's a weird duality when you sit down, bottom line, to design a cover. And one is, I want this to really communicate what kind of book this is.
Yes.
Is it lyrical? Is it angry? Is it subversive? Is it noirish? I mean, you might go with something. The second thing you want is very different. How do I make this stand out from the other stuff? So I want people to know this is science fiction, fantasy, detective. Yeah, but I want them to know it's different from everyone else's. And this just, I think, gets people into some really upsetting and stressful spaces.
No, it's true. How to stand out is a huge question. And the covers that I showed earlier are all standouts. And part of that is, you know, of course you can't Kindle. I think there's still black and white Kindles. So I have actually been told that you can't just rely on color, because there are some instances where black and white is going to happen to your cover, and some, you know, reds especially will vanish once you transform a cover into black and white. So you do still need to consider what that's going to look like, and designers should always pop it over.
I just realized, Francesca, the reason the covers that you showed us were standouts, I look different, is because they're from major publishers. And the major publisher can afford that.
Right.
If you are new and you are coming out from an indie,
Yeah.
the third thing you want, besides what I was talking about, is you want to look professional.
Right. And what is that? What is that ineffable quality of professionalism?
And as a designer and also as a corporate background person, my skill in life is faking things. Making some beginner speech sound just like what Steve Jobs would do.
Right.
That's my stock in trade.
Right.
And it's real interesting to me because when I'm doing a cover that's just a beginning thing, I'm trying to think, how close can I make this look to something that just came out from Dell or Tor?
Right. And, you know, my advice for people who are doing that and starting out is, especially with fonts, simplicity is your fallback. Like, I think a lot of people overcompensate by being really, really fancy and they use like really blocky. That's very clean. Right.
This is the second book out from B Cubed Press.
Right.
And this is a miracle.
Right. No, that's very clean. And that's what you should do. Like, if you don't have access to all these shiny, fancy, you know, people who you can't commission Kanuko Craft to do a gigantic, gorgeous thing for you and take several months, you know. go for simplicity. Go for go for bold, striking colors, and clean sans serif fonts.
Yeah.
And that way, at least you land in pleasing and legible.
Yeah. Which brings me to some of you know Maya Catherine Bonhoff. She's much, much more than just a cover designer. She's a beautiful author and is traditionally published, but she also is a filk singer. And for those of you who are not in the science fiction fantasy community, filk is the folk music of science fiction fantasy. Some of it is original and some of it is rip-offs or modifications of existing songs. But she did one to the tune of Coming Round the Mountain. It's called The Bimbo on the Cover of My Book. Nowhere in the book is she. and she goes on and on and on for multiple verses about all of the oddities that crop up. And this was much earlier in both our careers, of traditionally published books, of all the things that are wrong with the cover.
And I follow a ton of authors, and I actually, as an artist, I pay attention to when those things come up, and I find some of them funny sad. Is the comment like, oh no, they didn't do that to you, did they? And just not paying attention to what is in. They don't pay attention to the character. Unfortunately, sometimes it can be racist or sexist or all things that happen. Just assumptions that people make. People want to see this on the cover of this book, and it doesn't matter if it has anything to do with your book. It's about selling, and to some extent, the sad fact is it's true.
Yeah.
Like, what will sell the book?
We did a blog series on the Book View Cafe of really bad covers that we have had imposed upon us. And Vonda McIntyre of blessed memory had, I think it was a Dutch cover of one of her books, full frontal nudity. And there's no romance, no sex, nothing like that in the book.
Wow, I wonder what the publisher was thinking. Really, like what was the decision? Like this
have
to reach your audience is also the problem. Like sometimes people really do. Yeah,
Phil, you just actually made me realize that one of the struggles that B Cubed Press has is that doing a cover for a book with a story about a person is very different than having an anthology with 30 stories about madly different things.
Yes.
That actually is helping me a little bit understand why our cover experiences are so fascinating.
Yeah. I've seen more in collections of a single author, but in some anthologies where they take the title of the anthology is the title of the story of their lead author. Like we have David Gerald and Jim Wright and some other, Adam Troy Castro, are all in the upcoming anthology. And any one of their titles would make a title for the whole anthology. But it kind of...
I was just thinking of the title of the thing we just got from Jim Wright. And that would be the most alarming book cover title ever.
Which one was that?
It turned out to be Cancer After All.
That would be...
Yeah.
Memorable, but probably not. Yeah, you really don't want to go that
way. So, I've seen that happen, and that dictates the cover.
That could be one way to go. And as if you're like, what the heck do I even? Sometimes you do just need to cling on to a really strong image from one of your lead stories.
But Bob just popped into the chat room and said the trouble with tribbles. Because we do have David Gerald.
And our stable. Jim, the thing we have from Jim in Southern Truths is a title which no one can pronounce, which is not what you want to do for the book.
Right.
It was Antipodes, but everyone pronounces it antipodes. It depends on your classical background. I figured that it being Southern, it might be antipodes.
Yeah, that one cover Francesca showed us, it took me a long time to realize that it was absinthe.
Yes,
the green liqueur. And because the letters were broken up.
So obstructed.
I'm just a little bit dyslexic, and I wanted to make it absent he.
Yeah.
With spelled a little different, which we do a lot of.
That can be a trade-off. If you look at Jeff Vandermeer's, some of the covers for the Absolution, they break the text up into blocks like absolution or whatever, and it's incredibly striking and memorable. But it's a little bit of a brain teaser for the reader, for sure.
What Phil just said is actually why when I work with people on advertising billboards and brochures, I urge them not to have a headline in which they use different colors in the words, because what will happen is for some people, a couple of the words will pop out, the other ones will drop back, and that can actually end up with some really embarrassing situations.
I love it.
You get people who want to put the something or dis something in different colors, and then the modifier drops out.
Yes.
Yeah. This is
Sturgeon just popped in that he and Mark Ferrari did a panel at NorwestCon on bad covers, and they had a slideshow that was very popular. No. Cheryl Anderson says there are words that most of us read but never hear. So
common problem in our little world of readers.
And Susan Carroll come back. I feel like even I have no classical background. Harry Potter should have taught us how to pronounce antipodes.
Yes.
And kerning is important.
Kerning is very important. Yes.
Yeah.
So, Francesca, with the really sophisticated design programs now, do they mostly handle kerning, or does a lot of it still need to be done by the designer?
I end up handling a lot of it myself. You can. I'm very Photoshop heavy. And I do, of course, I do the interior layouts in InDesign as well. But nothing's ever really going to handle kerning for you. In body text, yes, you can throw a set of rules at it and it'll do what you need. But the designer still has a lot of work to do in making things fit. Especially for me with locust covers, I have so much text to fit on that I really end up playing a lot with kerning.
So we're actually running short of time. This is a hot topic, and I can tell from the comments I'm getting from Jeff Sturgeon, I'm going to have him on for covers part 2.
Oh yes, bad covers. Yes.
Well, he wants to talk about good ones as well, and how to do it right. But Francesca, show us a couple of locust covers that you really like, and tell us how you built them.
Oh sure. Let me.
Rob, we're going to need you back for the screen sharing.
Oh, sure. I should have pulled a few before, so you don't have to go through my entire file, but let me, are we sharing again? Oh, thank you very much. That's very kind. So let's see. I'll look at a recent one where this is, and you can see I'm trying to pull I'm putting a lot of stuff. So this is my artwork in the background. This is, the art here is actually Adobe stock. The little I guess it's a deer I just, I had the 11th hour. I was like, I want to make one myself. And then I was like, I don't have time. So this particular part is not mine, but everything else is. You can see I played with some kerning here with complete Hugo voting to make it feel more light and airy. And then I've tried to integrate the whole point of this cover is the integration between the text and the art. And I've also I'm trying to do a nod to the fanciness of your typical fantasy fonts without losing legibility. So I got this nice font in that has a little bit of that feel while still also feeling contemporary. I have a ton of stuff to put down here. So you'll notice, imagine this cover without any of the text. I could pull it up for you, but it would take time.
Wow.
But it's actually quite simple, and it relies and so these colors are very bold. So that's one I really enjoy doing. This one, it's a recent one that I had a great time doing. This one was one of my favorite recent ones that I did the art for, and this was tough because I wanted something very bold and colorful, but I also wanted that font to pop forward. So I'm using font heat, and I'm using that bright yellow to pull it forward. You were talking, Karen, about how to put things backwards and forwards using color, and I'm using that a lot here to bring that text forward. I just had so much fun doing this one. Let's see.
So you always do something with the O in locus.
Often I do, yeah. Here's another one. You can see that I love playing with this stuff, and I've made the A part of it.
And here's my multicolored teal cover.
Here it is, and sometimes we do that, yeah, for legibility reasons alone, because there's so much, or because there's enough busyness in other ways, and you want to tone down the color because there's so much going on. You can see how much text I have to fit. There's a lot to fit. And in this case, I actually started out with like these nice clean font through the whole thing, and it became like this wall of verticals, and it was too overwhelming to the eye. So I made the unusual step of going with a nice cursive font here to sort of just break it up for your eyeballs. So yeah, there's just so many things I could show you. I've done a lot of different solutions over the years. Yeah. This one was a real favorite of mine. But it's kind of like, you can see I was struggling a little with putting stuff over the art.
You use that the computer font.
Yes. And I made it, I decided, I was like, you know what, this needs to read science fiction immediately. And I liked the contrast between, like, the question is often, how many fonts do you want to use? And the answer is usually no more than 2. And you want them to be complementary, and you want them to, like, there has to be a reason why you're using 2. In this case, I'm using it to say genre. I'm using it as contrast and a little.
I'm fascinated by the way that all of these headline fonts you're using don't fight with the name locus. It works.
Yes, I actually, there are fonts that I have to rule out because we have this. Arnie Fenner designed this header. I designed the rocket for it. I changed up the rocket. It used to be like, we called it the cheese whale. There was like a very simple rocket, and but it's still, Arnie's old blocky, wonderful. I've tried a couple of new ones, but I like it, and it is still clean, but it does constrain the other fonts that we use.
Yeah, we're down to 3 minutes.
All right,
yep. So we've got to let Bob come back.
Yeah, let's take us off with a share.
Yeah,
there we go. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's fun to talk about this forever.
You've answered so many questions. Enlightened us. This is great. Hey, Bob.
Oh, Cliff says that Locust Spaceship is still my iPad background image. Yay! It was one of our Indiegogo backer rewards, was using some of my art for the reward.
Yeah, I know. And now I'm going to have Karen quoting you for the next week.
Absolutely, Karen is welcome to ask me any other questions at any time about cover.
That's okay. Karen and I think, have come up with some interesting covers over time.
Awesome.
I frankly thought that some of our B-Cube covers have aroused a comment or two over time. Our first book was a snowflake cover that Alexander James Adams, while on tour, got his Apple iPad out and built on his Apple iPad. While we were in the midst of trying to get it out. Of course, that was a 100-day anthology.
Yeah.
So we were fighting for time.
And that cover was inspired by one of the stories.
Oh, yeah. Not necessarily one of the stories, one of the rejections. I had a fellow that sent us a story that was a bit of, it was unfinished. I could tell that there was something he had to say,
It was a rant. It was not even an essay, let alone a
We
story.
attract rants.
Okay.
For the snowflake background.
Yeah, well, what
Where-
he said was, I don't want to be part of your anthology. You're just a bunch of snowflakes.
Whiny snowflakes, he said.
Yeah.
Oh,
And so
what
I
do you
said,
live
are
for?
you
You're like, we'll embrace the snowflake, right?
Yeah. And so we then adopted the snowflake on almost all of our covers at some point. And then Susan Murray McDonald, a brilliant little writer from Tennessee, yes, Tennessee, has writers. They're allowed to publish. And she wrote a story about the sword in the stone with King Arthur returning to save the world, save Britain from a great threat, and he rose from his crypt at the same time as Trump's plane was landing in Britain, and so we took and made that the sword in the snowflake. Uh, Now, do you have your beret handy?
I do not have my beret handy. I am
You have your
sorry to say.
patch.
Yeah. We made patches of that logo. I have one on a the sleeve of a denim jacket.
I have it.
I'll have to
Actually,
look.
hold on, Bob.
Great.
I've got it.
Okay, and it became known as I saw it as the sword in the snowflake. Karen and a few of the other writers took it and turned it upside down and made it into what they called the warrior snowflake.
Mm-hmm.
And it has been our image for ages. Now, while Karen is gone, I have to say, this last cover, have you seen our cover for
For,
Southern Truths?
I have not seen it.
Well,
there it is, right in the middle.
yeah, Karen has got
Oh, that's great. I love the snowflake
the
one.
snowflake in there.
Yeah.
Well,
I have the space
Love
lasers.
that. Love that.
it got turned upside down to make the warrior snowflake, and that works rather well. Well, the reason I ask if you've seen it yet is because I keep getting emails from Amazon saying that you guys must have been closed, your Oakland offices, because they can't deliver the books. But we'll figure it out.
That's random. It's possible. We have been closed this week. Well, not closed, but mostly closed. We have a couple people manning it, but
It's okay.
definitely some holiday times have happened. So.
Yeah, that, and they're in a hurry, and maybe they couldn't find it. But anyway, we'll see. We'll get that worked out. But I tell you, I joke about covers because at the stage we're at, people know generally what our books are about, and the covers are kind of a added benefit if we really have a rocking cover. And I thought that Karen and I went through a lot of iterations on Southern Truths, and we wound up with what I believe is a rocking cover. And we're
We
gonna
switched
do
out
this.
the image at the last minute.
Mhm.
Well, the email that says to Karen when I'm trying to work with the image I had, and Karen made that point earlier about the understanding now that the wraparound cover needs a different image than does just the cover, and I was trying to work with a cover that was a great cover image for a Kindle or a front cover,
Oh, right.
but it had no capability to be able to be a wraparound cover,
Right.
because to wrap it, I would lose the image on the front
Yeah,
that was so
dimensions are
critical.
so important. Yeah.
That's one of the problems with more photographic stuff.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so I sat in there and I had this one image in my mind that I went and looked for, and I found it, and I sent it to Karen with a note that said basically, well, I was just screwing around. And
maybe this will work.
and she went to work on it and turned that into a nice, very nice looking cover.
It's actually gotten a lot of comment, which kind of amazed me. It's very distinctive looking, and I tampered with the color tone to make it even scarier looking.
Ooh.
It's a horror cover.
Can you show it to us? I want to see. Ooh, that's nice. Yes.
It actually is better in the Kindle version.
Yeah, yeah. You notice how she got the truths to kind of fade in and out.
But the Kindle version is better.
Is it? Okay. It is interesting how
wait
they
a second.
change
I
up
had a comment on that.
dimensions.
Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm done. The
I like the
Kindle
colors.
version. Kindle version is good. They're both good, but it's what you kind of were talking about, a sparse cover.
Yeah.
Where the kerning is good on the lettering, and it's well spaced
Yes.
to get it where it needed to be. And but the it's fun making covers. And when we get off of here, Karen and I'll probably have a short discussion on covers. But I gotta say, we got the new book coming. But I don't want you to forget Southern Truth. Honest to God, I've got as much positive feedback on that book as you can believe. Jim Wright, one of our writers, mentioned that he had read the entire thing and he loves it. Of all the people who've ever read my books and not loved them, my wife read this book through and loved it. People who read this book literally read it through.
It's interesting because with an anthology, you will generally have 4 or 5 good stories and a lot of stuff. And this one, actually, all the stories are good. It's quite shocking. People really feel, I think it's the passion. People really feel passionately about the political topics right now because they're affecting people's lives directly. It's not an abstraction.
And this one is not as overtly political. This was about, and I know I appreciated Karen not reaching through the screen and whacking me on this one, because I grew up in the South and I took my Southern experiences and I wrote the foreword for this, basically saying the South lives the greatest lie ever told. That they haven't. They rewrote their own history, and now they believe it.
Yes.
And that essence might have turned off a few readers, but I tell you what, it's delivered in the book.
One of the stories in the book is called the Great Georgia Lesbian Potluck. And it was written by a young woman who hasn't been published before. She's a college student. And it was about her experience of being a lesbian at the church revival that she has gone to all her life, full of people she loves, and seeing some of them do cruel things to a visiting Black preacher, but seeing people also do wonderful things. And this incredible ambiguity and her realization that one of her unmarried elderly aunts is also a lesbian. And it is done with so much love for the South that was really what we wanted, the sort of the tragedy of being in a culture that has such an identity and has so much love, but has so much bad stuff hidden in the attic.
Yeah.
And sometimes getting out of the attic.
Yeah, it was. That was one of my favorite stories in it. I think we put it in number 2. Yeah, and you can tell how much I like a story by where I put it in the book.
I taught him
up your secrets.
I taught him that.
Well, it's obviously you put your best story first, and then the next first 3 stories are really solid, and then you go into the middle, put a story you really like there, so for the people who just pick the book up and open it up and look at it, and then you find that closing story that rocks. This one was simple. I could put almost any story anywhere.
That's what you want.
Yes.
We try and get good stories throughout. So it might be that those stories are the ones that are closer to the theme, that we pick in those first, because on More Alternative Truths, our first one, I took a little rant page and a half rant, about 200 words from Adam Troy Castro. And it was literally about Trump in the bathroom whining and wouldn't come out because he was mad about something, throwing a 2-year-old fit. Not because it was the greatest thing he had ever written, because it said everything I wanted to say about that book. And if you picked that book up and turned to the first page and read that, you had no illusions
about what ride you were on, right?
And that was our best-selling book we've ever
Proof in
published.
advertising.
And I owe a little bit of it to Adam Troy Castro, a lot of it to Phil, and a lot of it to our artist, Alexander James Adams, who put together a good cover. But anyway, enough about history. The future is Karen and Phil are editors, along with Cliff Winnig, Lou
Yeah.
J. Berger, and Deborah Godfrey, with myself as the fearless leader. Fearless. Hey,
He is so diplomatic with his rejections.
When we are accepting stories and we're going through the slush, there is one category in which you can say, this story cannot be rejected without this person going through me. And I notice we're getting a lot of those ratings on what's coming in because people are getting passionately attached to some of these stories.
That's a good sign. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, it is fun. We only have one rule. And by the way, we are still open till December 20th. We take poetry, we take essays, and we got stories. And I tell you, I just accepted right now our 5th story, and that was an Adam Troy Castro story.
Nice.
Oh, I think I have to tell you something. I sat and cried when I read that story. He has written some amazing stuff for us. This is the most. I am so honored that people are submitting this stuff to us and not to, big name magazines. I'm just so honored that they're coming.
Mhm.
Yes.
Oh yeah. I mean, right now we've got setting in the submission pile, not because they're rejected, just because we haven't. I don't like to over accept at the beginning, because if you accept and say, oh, look, it's Harry Turtledove, we have to take him, or it's David Gerald, we have to take this, or it's Louise Marley, we have to take this. Of course, we're probably going to, 95% chance, but I like to hold off and leave enough room at the end. So, like we did on Alternative Deathiness, a book Phil edited. I had a kid out in my backyard laying blocks for me, helping me, that showed me he could move a pallet full of bricks that weighed 90 pounds faster than I could. And then he mentioned, I mean, bulky, big guy. And then he mentioned he wrote a story in high school. And I knew the teacher that he went through, and he said his teacher told him it was a good story. So I said, bring it over. So the next time he came over, he handed me a manuscript that he had typed out or printed out. And he's sitting there moving 90-pound blocks. And I'm reading his story. Oh. And I bought it right then and there, first thing he'd ever submitted. So BQ Press has got a lot of writers that is the first thing they've ever submitted, or their first pro sale, or whatever you want to call it. And we love them. And our covers come from a lot of different places. They come from searches on the internet. They come from artists who professionally do covers. They come from musicians like Alexander James Adams. So we love being broad, and love having a diversity. Because there's one thing I can tell you: only one time have I ever sat down and actually counted male, female. and it turned out we were even.
Yeah.
And I don't do it anymore because names don't mean anything. What matters is the story. But we have generally had at least a fifth of our stories are from overseas. You know, we have Argentinian stories. We've got stories from Greece, Italy,
And
England, Canada.
it also, when I read stories coming from other cultures and other countries, it makes me realize how different the United States looks, and some of the words that people use to describe institutions in the United States are not words we would use, and yet they're true. We don't let ourselves say these words.
Oh yeah, God. There's a woman named Paula Hammond. She
Yes.
she lives in Wales. I don't know why she moved from London to Wales because I love London, but you know, it's her choice. Uh,
Wales is so beautiful.
I know, but it's I will give you it's probably beautiful
It's got
but
bookstores.
but she writes so beautifully. If I could, if so there's days I just want to, she writes as like I said, Brenda Clough, who's not here with us today, writes beautifully. Just the prose she puts together just resonates with you. I love reading writers like that, and it's fun. But I've taken up too much of your time there. You guys, closing thoughts on covers?
They're important.
Well, Cheryl Alexander in the comments said covers can make or break. So I think that that is absolutely true. Yes.
And covers have to be a labor of love or they won't work.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll leave it with one thing, though. A great cover isn't going to make a bad book better.
That's certainly true.
You've got to have the inside right, or you're just throwing money away.
That's right.
Yeah. And so that said, thank you. And I'm about to push
Thank
the
you,
button.
Francesca.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Bye-bye, everybody. So nice to meet you, Francesca.
Nice to meet you too, Phil.
We're still live. We're counting down.